Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rise of Privacy Tech or TROPT Webcast. I'm Lourdes Turrecha, founder of the Rise of Privacy Tech, privacy tech enthusiast. I'm an advisor and also angel investor in some of these emerging privacy tech startups. I've been a privacy officer, still a fractional CPO from time to time to select startups, and have practiced as a privacy professional for the last almost 15 years. I'm so excited to bring to you additional insights from privacy domain experts when it comes to what's going on in the emerging privacy tech industry. So last year, we went on to define the emerging privacy tech landscape in our white paper. And this year, we built upon that work and really fleshed out the framework for categorizing privacy tech. And we are bringing in insights from select domain experts, particularly the TROPT Privacy Tech Visionaries, which is an exclusive group of CPOs, privacy engineers, innovators, and privacy tech founders in this space. And today, I couldn't be more excited to welcome to this episode Stuart Lee, who is one of the leading CPOs out there, very innovative and forward thinking. And so it's always a pleasure for me to speak with him. He is also VP and Chief Privacy Officer at VMware. Welcome to the TROPT Webcast, Stuart, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lourdes. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course, my pleasure. So I like to ask everyone, despite me knowing your background already, I always invite every guest to talk about what led them to doing work in privacy and in particular their interest in privacy tech. So Stuart, what is your privacy origin story and specifically what got you interested in the emerging privacy tech landscape?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, like many other CPOs or privacy professionals, I found myself in privacy rather than drove forward for a career in privacy. So my first exposure was a job out of college where I was a data administrator handling and processing different education records. And there I was first introduced to this idea of privacy in the requirements and the controls I must have in place, etc. I then go to grad school and started collecting data for my PhD. And again, I was exposed to this concept of privacy, which was super interesting as a requirement that I had to address as part of my own work. And then coming out of that, I went into consulting, into cybersecurity predominantly. And where I was like, wait a minute, hold on, this thing called the Data Protection Act, I've heard about that a couple of times before. And I was working with some great colleagues at the time. And really then started building my career from there. And since then have been able to travel the world 2 or 3 times with the GDPR implementation, customers of all different sectors, and it just really grew to where I am today. I think anybody that takes on the role in privacy, and certainly as a CPO, they have an inherent desire to help those around them to really raise the game for protections of the rights and freedoms of individuals. And technology and privacy tech is the enabler that can help get us there. We can't scale. The technology landscape keeps growing. The laws keep getting more complicated. Privacy tech is that thing that's going to help us raise our game so that we can really make sure that we're doing the right thing by the individual.
Oh my goodness. It's only been the first 2-3 minutes and so many things, so many points that you pointed out resonates with me. I mean, of course, the first one is your hands-on experience as a data administrator, and your exposure to laws like the Data Protection Act. It was similar for me. It was my hands-on exposure to data transfers. It was still the EU-US data, a safe harbor then before it got invalidated, and then before Privacy Shield got invalidated, that got me interested in this space. So that resonated with me quite a bit. But really, the last point you made about privacy tech as an enabler is an important one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have the expertise as privacy professionals, but as humans, it's really hard to scale that, right? And there's so many things that can be more efficient and scaled with the help of technology. And I'm excited to hear that this is something that you share with many of the TROPT community members. I'm curious, like when you talk about privacy tech internally, what are some of the challenges that you see, or even with the startups that you work with, what are some of the challenges that you see that faces this industry? It's such a nascent industry. It's only been a few years since we've had, a few startups. I mean, there are now more than 1,000 privacy tech startups according to Crunchbase, but we've only had a couple unicorns here and there, and they attribute their success to GDPR and these global data protection laws. I'm curious, do you see any big challenges in terms of scaling and adoption, and how do you think we can overcome these challenges as an industry?
Yeah, I think it's helping us to define what we need as privacy professionals. I think that's a big challenge. When we were looking at the GDPR, there were kind of two big use cases that everyone looked at. One was the records of processing activity. The other one was very much those impact assessments or privacy reviews. And that's where a lot of the attention went to at the time. Since then, we've started seeing a lot more emergence around things like incident response, data subject rights, being able to help really scale those. And then there's those areas where we've already had some tooling in the market, but needed to help us more. Data discovery as being one great example there.
Right.
So I think that's the first part. It's really kind of continually defining the need. And what we're also seeing, I think, more broadly across the privacy industry is this emergence of the privacy operator, the privacy operations lead, the privacy engineer, the privacy engineering team. Those are going to help us get more to those technologies that can really drive us forward in terms of what can really do those things. The concept of privacy enhancing technologies sometimes got, I think, a little bit muddled with when we started talking about program management. Where we are now is talking more about what does it mean to have an enhancing technology? What does it mean to have an enabling technology? How can we do those things that are able to help us with things like pseudonymization or redaction or obfuscation, pulling from other expertise areas that allow us to do those at scale? I think that's the biggest challenge that faces us, is really those clean use cases. Being able to have the teams that are able to then use those tools and to really execute those tools, I think is something that we're now seeing kind of emerging through, and this will kind of keep growing from there. And I think it's a really interesting space to be in right now, because we are defining what that landscape looks like. We should, as privacy professionals, keep an eye on what already does exist, because there are things that, as I mentioned, that can already help us. But then being able to feed in those additional requirements that we need, so that those tools, those existing tools, can kind of grow into a supporting aspect of your privacy tech stack. That's going to really bring it all together. So there's perhaps a lot to unpack there, Lourdes, but I think it's very much the kind of making sure that we keep evolving our need and our demand, having the skills and the resources and the teams that can support those, and then leveraging the existing tech to really help us come along that journey and to keep clarifying as to what's going to really help us to meet the rights and the freedoms of the individuals. And then I guess the final thing I'd say about this is a call to action for us always to embrace those technologies.
Right.
It's very easy to defer back to some things which are based on spreadsheets or perhaps a little bit more comfortable.
No.
We in this field need to embrace it, because that's how we get better.
This seems to be a trend that I'm picking up on the interviews, and that trend is how we, the buyers, we need to do a better job when it comes to articulate what those pain points are. And on the startup side, the ones who are building the tools, them doing a better job getting market research and seeking out the problems that need technological solutions to. And so it sounds like that's something that resonated with me as a buyer when I was still a buyer, and it seems like it still exists as a pain point out there. One thing, I think our last meeting, I'm not sure if you were there at our last TROPT Privacy Tech Visionaries meeting, we one of our esteemed colleagues mentioned, like, we really need solutions that solve our pain points, not solutions that some of the builders think solve our problems, but don't actually do that. I love your call to action. I think, previous to this, I had another interview this morning where we talked about embracing privacy tech because we're not scalable, and it's the same. It's such a important thing to highlight. There is a shortage of privacy tech experts, and so in order for us to get to the important work, we should start leveraging technologies that will help us where there are potential efficiencies to take advantage of. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you see that stand out to you when you're sitting in on vendor demos? Like, what are some pitfalls that you see, and what advice can you share to founders who are pitching privacy minded buyers like you?
Yeah, I think my first thing is don't come in and tell me what I need to do to comply. I wouldn't be talking to you if I didn't already know that. And the number of demos that I have that start with explaining to me what the law requires, like that's happened. That ship has sailed. I've probably got something very nascent in place that I'm trying to evolve from at this point. So, get to where I need you to be, I guess is that first part. And then I think building on what something you just said is hear what my pain points are, and think about what I need to evolve my journey and be the partner with me in this space. I feel like the best conversations I have with any tech startup in this space right now is really where they're listening and responding to where I see things going and what my unique challenges are. And if I'm going with a startup, it's probably because they're more agile and they're able to make those changes in a much more dynamic fashion than, say, somebody that's been around for a lot longer that has a very much set playbook in some of this space. So that listen and responding piece is super important for me. And don't overpromise and underdeliver. I understand that there's some aspects of the technology that's not quite there yet, and we haven't figured it out yet, and that's okay. I'm a realist. What I don't want is to be able to bring somebody in thinking that I'm going to do all these really cool things and then find out if it falls short. So be the best at what you're bringing to the table, because that's what I want to hear about, and then work with me to fix it for my specific set of use cases. We're in a B2B environment, so some of my challenges, while similar to many other companies, may be a little bit more unique as well. And so having to work through that conversation and those opportunities, that's where I want my vendor to meet me.
Such great advice, and I hope that the privacy tech vendors who are listening are taking down notes. Your points highlight one of the advantages of being an early adopter. On the one hand, this is really interesting to me because on the one hand, B2B companies that are pretty big sometimes shy away from engaging with startups for obvious reasons. Some of them security, some of them privacy, right? Like we've vetted startups on their privacy and security posture and determined that they're not quite as mature as we want them to be. But there are advantages to engaging early, and you highlight that really well, which is getting a tool, a set of features and solutions included in their roadmap because they're so early on. And so we like to highlight that at the Rise of Privacy Tech. There are so many potential buyers who have real pain points and use cases that need tech solutions to. And if anyone is listening, listen. Stuart just shared his perspective and his point of view on this. So listen up, folks. Well, let's switch then to other buyers. So we talked about your advice to founders. What about other CPOs, privacy engineers, other privacy tech buyers who have a hard time getting internal buy-in for budget, for consensus, or even just getting consensus, because it's such a cross-functional area. When you buy privacy tech, it's oftentimes you oftentimes have to work with IT for implementation, with InfoSec to make sure that the tool or marketing when it comes to consent management. I'm curious, like, what are some advice you can give to help with that process, particularly when it comes to getting budget, but also when it comes to getting consensus from cross-functional teams?
Engaging early and often is always paramount in this. I have some wonderful colleagues in our information technology team that I work hand in glove with on many of these issues. And we've got the relationship where I'll come and say, this is what I need to do. And I don't think we have anything in this space that does it right now. Let's confirm that, because that's the first thing you do. If you walk in saying, I need tool X, then you're often going to be met with that conversation of, well, we've already got things that meet that requirement. And so having that early conversation as to explaining why the existing tooling may or may not meet the need makes the next part of the conversation much easier, which is, well, who should we go and get and what are the requirements we need to meet?
Mm-hmm.
They can help you with a lot of the technical requirements and thinking about what the implementation would look like and how long the implementation will take and all those other good things. And you need them on your side when you're going for the budget, because you ultimately will need some resourcing to help you there. So I think that's the first two things: engage early and often, and really make sure you've done your homework. The other part of it, and I think this appeals more from a finance perspective, is show the cost reduction or the predicted cost reduction. And some teams in this space have done a great job. Is where you can really start saying, look, I can put in this tool, it's going to save X number of hours, people hours of being able to run these tasks manually. It's going to save these efforts from the business, which ultimately, in the current environment, we all need to find ways to free up our own bandwidth to be able to work on some other priorities. And being able to turn this away from being, I need a tool to comply, towards I need this tool to help me scale, to help save long-term money, to be able to focus my team on the actual value generating efforts, rather than the things which really are taking up some time in the back end. I think those are important. And then within any organization, it's always a case of whatever you're doing, communicating it. Even if you're just working as a privacy team in somewhat of a silo, the chances are that your tooling is going to impact other teams. Either it's because it's an intake process or it's a thing that you use for discovery. Cross-communicating what you're doing. Other people may be interested to learn or to also cross-invest in that technology with you. But then also why you're doing and all those good things. If you get people to follow you on the journey with that transparency, which we always talk about in privacy, and rightly so, that really helps us to make sure that we can continue to be successful when we're trying to have those buy-in conversations. And then obviously, of course, as we're thinking about IT and others, the buy v build conversation, you're having those conversations super early, explaining why building may be a bigger challenge than buying, but you're having the right conversations with the right teams at that point.
Yeah, you actually read my mind. I had written down build versus buy as a follow-up question, because your response really pointed to that challenge that we face, right? So I think I've seen it framed as, building from scratch or leveraging an existing tool that the data governance team might already have in place, or the IT team might already have in place, or building or buying a new product altogether. And it really depends on the requirements, like you were saying, right? And communicating whether the existing options are good enough, and what you could get out from a purchase. And the answer is oftentimes different for different organizations, as I've seen it play out. And it might be that you start with building as a band-aid or leveraging an existing tool as a band-aid solution, and then as you mature your program, you end up scaling through a purchase. I'm curious, as one of our visionaries, you're one of the forward-thinking folks in the community. I'm curious where you see this emerging nascent privacy tech industry in, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And I can also reframe that to ask, where would you like this industry to be in 5 to 10 years? What's the vision that comes to mind when you think about this space?
Well, I mean, for me, that's what makes this field so interesting is that the magic 8 ball can't necessarily tell you what it's going to look like. It's so
Yeah,
changing.
right.
And even now, what we're 5 years post GDPR, or 5 years and 5 months or so post GDPR, we're still in that really kind of new realm. I think what we're going to see is an increase in true automation. I think at the
Mm.
moment we talk a lot about automation, but it's still not fully quite right there.
It's a little clanky, yeah.
It's still a little bit clanky, and there's the aspects of getting into the code and starting to
Mhm.
really talk the developers of the developer language, the engineer language, the being able to look at things that when we say by design, really, really to the left. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of the tech piece. I think now, like we talk about in marketing, we say MarTech. I think the Priv Tech, the privacy tech stack, I think is going to be something that we're a lot more comfortable talking about. And I think we're going to probably see, a lot of the startups that we hear and see about today really continuing and growing their journey, which is just super exciting. I think there's some folks that are really working on some interesting things, and probably some
Yes.
of the other major players in some of the compliance technology stack, maybe really improving some of their offerings as well here. So I think that's where I think it's going to go. Where I would like to take it, me personally, is that automation piece. I want to be able to free up my team so they're thinking about the bigger strategic conversations, the bigger, what are the things that we could be thinking beyond, the day-to-day activities of compliance. I think that's where it's going to really, really help us. Being able to alert me as to where I'm seeing risk, predicting where I'm going to be seeing some of those changes, and really helping me to do things at scale. I think that's ultimately my big goal. But this is why those of us that get to work in privacy love it, because it's just so evolving and there's so many different areas in which you can go in. This morning I was talking about AI, blockchain, been talking about a lot more of the work around pseudonymization and anonymization, and what does that mean as we start thinking about concepts such as k-anonymity, and then how we can really be building on these concepts with our teams. All of this is super interesting when you then come back to the whole trust and transparency with the individual, and then how you really foster that. So the tech space is just really super fascinating about all the different areas you can go into, and I'm just excited to be here for the ride.
Oh, I love it. I share that enthusiasm, obviously. And I want to unpack a couple of the things that you mentioned. The shift left privacy trend that, we talked about that in last year's white paper. We had started seeing privacy tech startups building in this space for developers to really get ahead of the problem from the very beginning, before data is even collected, when products are being built by engineers and developers. And I'm with you. I want to see that, I want to see that category mature. I mean, we've seen most of the maturity in the privacy program management and workflow automation space. Although I'm with you, the true automation is not quite there yet. But I'd love to see that privacy at the code level, get that traction that it deserves, because that's really, like you said, that's how we get true privacy by design from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned MarTech. I'm with you. I think PrivTech is going to catch on as well. Although interestingly, it reminds me of how some of the interesting startups I'm seeing there in privacy tech is actually disrupting MarTech and ad tech. So it's really cool that they're in the intersection of both spaces. And we're also seeing that in cybersecurity, where there are privacy tech startups that are building in security as well. So there are a few adjacencies, and same with data governance, right? Like the mapping automation tools that we're using for ROPA are adjacent to data governance. So it's a really exciting broad space that I can't wait to see where it goes in 5 to 10 years.
Especially when we've got ESG as well. I mean, and
Yes.
increasing conversation of privacy in there. Yeah, we could go on for a long time about it. It's just super fascinating.
Can I actually? So I love that you mentioned that. I'm going to pivot to that, because to me, privacy is an important component of ESG. And I'm curious how you think about privacy tech, and what are some of the, I mean, ESG is such a hot topic at the board level, at the leadership, C-suite and board levels. And I'm curious, like, how do we make sure that not only privacy, but privacy tech in particular is a part of that conversation? Like, how do we advocate for privacy tech at that level? I mean, and you, as with your work at VMware as VP and CPO, and the number of clients you've had at Deloitte, like, you're used to having that conversations at such a high level that I'm curious, like, how do you make that case for privacy tech under the ESG umbrella?
Yeah, I think there's several ways. The first one that automatically comes to mind is that technology can help you measure performance. And if you're reporting out about how your privacy agenda is applying into your trust agenda, your for societal good, your governance, tech can help you start getting some of the numbers around that support your argument. It can reiterate and show you how you're driving some of the changes that are making a meaningful impact in your organization. I think that is the big one. It just really helps to do that. Also, it inherently reflects a maturity of your program. If you're using a technology to help you do things at scale, the chances are that your program is inherently a little bit more mature as well, assuming that you're using the technology correctly. And so I think those are the key areas. It can really support your message to the board in a way that actually is something that they can truly understand, versus just saying we did X number of reviews this year, or we did X number of incidents. You can start talking about how you've scaled all of that, or how you've identified the bigger risks, or how you've mitigated risks, or you've really played a part in that ESG conversation that's actually made a meaningful change to your organization.
I love that. So, I love the framing of using privacy tech to measure performance and getting really good data to share that story with the board or with the leadership in general, and then using it to reflect the maturity of your privacy program. Such great points. Thank you for sharing those two. Before we start wrapping up, because this has been such a lovely, insightful conversation, I'd love to ask you a couple of lightning round questions if you're up for it.
Sure, absolutely.
So when you're thinking about the future of privacy tech, this industry, do you feel optimism or cynicism? Pick one, and why.
Optimistic, because I think we're starting to ask the right questions, and driving towards the right solutions that will help us.
Couldn't agree more. What is one consumer privacy tech tool that you use?
Consumer privacy tech tool.
You use as a person, not in your job.
I think I overuse every single cookie management solution. And I've actually noticed that I personally will change my preferences on which cookies I allow drop based on the sites I'm visiting, the brands that I want to engage with, etc. It's how I pick my next vacation.
Wow.
So yeah, it's definitely one that
Wait, tell me more. What do you mean?
Well, certainly when I'm starting to browse the different sites about the hotels or the locations,
oh, right.
Like that's some of the advantage of being able to say, actually, no, I want to opt in to see some targeted marketing around Bora Bora or wherever it could be on my bucket list. I think those are the areas where I probably do benefit the most.
Got it. I thought for a split second there that you meant I'm not going to go to Europe because I'm going to be inundated with those cookie banners whenever I'm in the EU. But no, I get what you're saying. What is one privacy tech solution that you would like to see built that doesn't exist yet?
I think automated anonymization. I think that would be being able to apply that straight away on a data set that, I'm sure there's ways that it can already be done through various algorithms, etc. Being able to do that at a scale that I can therefore have some degree of confidence as to what that degree of anonymization truly is. I think that's something that, as I say, if it exists, I'd love to hear about it. So if there's anybody watching that can provide me with some advice, that's great. But I think for all sizes of companies, up and down, from the global to the small and medium-sized enterprises that can't necessarily afford a higher end solution. That's the part, because we always, I'm sorry, I know this is supposed to be lightning round. We always think about solving for some of the bigger companies in this space, but it's the small and medium-sized enterprises that need all of our support in helping them with their journey. And so these solutions need to be scalable at both ends of the spectrum.
Wow, thank you. I did not expect that response, but it makes a ton of sense to me. Last one before we start to wrap up. If you had a hypothetical billboard, what privacy message would you like to share to, I don't know, millions or billions of people?
A hypothetical privacy billboard. I would say that it's
or pop-up. What, I guess that's more appropriate in this
no,
conversation.
I think it's we do care about your privacy. Please tell us your expectations.
That's a good one. Thank you. Stuart, I love this conversation. There are so many takeaways, but it's hard to pick, but I will pick one. I love your call to action when it comes to embracing privacy tech to scale and leverage, not just thinking about it as a compliance tool, but to leverage it for value and for scaling your organization. So that's an excellent takeaway over there. And I share your optimism when it comes to the future of privacy tech and innovation. Before we say goodbye to the listeners, Stuart, I'd love to invite you to share any calls to action that you personally might have in terms of, maybe if you want to be found, how folks can reach you online or through or any way. It's your privacy choice if you'd like to be found, or any other parting closing words that you would like to share with the TROPT community who's listening in.
I mean, first and foremost, thank you to the entire community. I think this is the area where we're going to raise the bar for privacy. We're going to really make a meaningful change to the rights and freedoms of individuals and being able to facilitate and enable those. So thank you to everybody for all that you do. I, as you can tell, very passionate about this subject. LinkedIn is the best place to find me. Please reach out. I'm always excited and happy to engage in these conversations. And, this is how we make each other better. So thank you for all that you do.
And thank you for all that you do, Stuart, and for sharing your insights with us. If anyone wants to read further, we are incorporating Stuart's valuable expertise and insights into this year's TROPT Privacy Tech Stack white paper, along with the other TROPT Privacy Tech visionaries, expert advice and insights as well. So we'll share a link to that in the comments if anyone wants to read that. And, like Stuart was saying, thank you to the founders, the investors who are building, and the buyers and domain experts advising startups in this space. We appreciate you working with us to move this industry forward. Thanks, Stuart.